Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Brown, and I am the founder and CEO of Gillis Education. And I am so excited to have Priten Shah and Sofia Rios with me today to talk about a very important topic, AI, or artificial intelligence, in education. And we're going to talk about the risks of AI in education and the rewards. And so before I hand it over to Sophia on my team to moderate today's talk, I'll just give a brief introduction. Sofia Rios is a native of Puerto Rico and is currently a tutor and educational consultant with Gillis Education. She has a ton of experience with students of all ages and education levels. And thankfully for us, she's able to provide tutoring services in both English and in Spanish. She attended Berkeley College as a business management student and has now returned to pursue a master's in data science. So we're so thankful to have Sophia on our team. And we're also joined today by Priten Shah, who is the CEO of Pedagogy.Cloud, which is a company that provides innovative technology solutions to help educators navigate global challenges in a rapidly evolving world. He's also the author of AI and the Future of Education, Teaching in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And he's also the founder of the civic-focused nonprofit United for Social Change. He has a BA in philosophy and an MED in education policy from Harvard University. So thank you both again for joining us. And I will hand it over to Sophia to start our discussion.
All right. Then, as she said, we're going to be talking about generative AI and the future of education. For today, I kind of want to focus on both the perspective of educators and also students. So to kind of get started on this topic, I actually wanted to ask about how generative AI tools such as Socrat.ai and Pedagogue.ai can help both educators and students. And just to preface this, a lot of our audience members, I know some of my family members are watching, they might not be too aware about how these AI tools work, so kind of explain it as if they haven't used something like that before. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a lot about AI, but when we're talking about AI today, it's all about generative AI. The kind of AI that you've already been seeing for the last few years includes everything from like your Siri and your Netflix algorithms, and those kind aren't really the ones that we're talking about in education right now. Generative AI, which is what we'll talk about today, is a particular kind, and the key part is in the name of it. And so generative AI's main goal is to generate new content, and new is the key word here. And the way it does this is by taking lots and lots of data and learning whatever patterns it can from that data, and then using that to create brand new things that look like an initial data set. And so, for example, if it has a database of what a cat looks like, it might learn that a cat has a tail, it has fur, some cats have stripes. And then when you ask it to create a new image of a cat, it uses the pattern to synthesize from that data to create a new image of a cat. And that's a little bit different than how like Google search algorithm works when you're putting in like I want to see a cat on Google image search, because that's really good at like doing a search of existing images. It's not creating a brand new image. And so that's the key. That's the one key thing to think about today is a lot of what we're talking about is all about this, like the AI algorithms that create new content. And there's all kinds of different ones. And so everybody's been hearing about ChatGPT and Google's Bard/Gemini. We've been hearing about like Claude in some circles, and a lot of they're basically popping up everywhere. And all of these tools, they're primarily focused on text. And so they've been trained on large amounts of text to create brand new text. And that's what makes it really exciting for education, because we use lots of text in education. And so being able to create all kinds of things, including lesson plans to like sample reading prompts, to even having a conversation, are really cool potentials for the technology. So there's so much to talk about in terms of just like thinking about what all of this means and how we can apply all of it. But I'll stop there and kind of maybe let you decide where we go next.
I mean, I was hoping we can maybe say some examples. We can get started with the educator's perspective and then move on to the student side of it. So what are the ways that maybe educators can use this tool? Because I've seen a lot of reluctance to it because they're kind of scared, like, oh, it's going to take my job away. Like, what should I do? And we're also seeing a lot of schools banning AI in general. So what are some ways that maybe educators can use it?
Yeah. So because it can generate lots of content and it's been trained on lots of content, educators use it for all kinds of things where they're generating some form of content. And when we think about like the breakdown of an educator's job, time outside of the classroom is spent like doing a lot of content generation that doesn't fully require the teacher's full of like unique perspective. And so what we like to have teachers do is like see if they can use these tools to kind of get 80 to 90% of the way done with any sort of task they have. And so it can do everything from create the lesson plans that I talked about to worksheets and sample problems. It can write emails for you. It can make permission slips for you. It can answer angry emails from a parent, which is one of my favorite use cases. So all kinds of things where you're basically writing text. Any of these tools, and my go-to like for everybody to start is definitely ChatGPT. It's the most powerful. It's the one everybody's talking about. And just like go in and have a conversation with it about any kind of thing you need to do. And that's the key part here is I think folks get really scared about like, oh, like I need to be a prompt engineer or take this prompt engineering course in order to learn how to like talk to ChatGPT. But one of the important things to note is that a lot of these tools, especially the popular ones, are trained to have conversations, right? So that's where the chat and ChatGPT comes from, is that they're trained to actually mimic a human conversation. And so we like to tell teachers that if you're scared, if you have no idea where you're starting, don't try to like read a bunch of like these guides that are out there. Go in and start and put in what you need to do. And so the book takes that perspective too. Like there's not like these elaborate prompts. They're just really simple ideas of what you can kind of ask these systems to do. And then have it do a task for you. And it won't get it right. It will 110% not do it exactly the way you would as a person. And that's where I think we'll also like start losing a lot of teachers the last couple of months, or 6 months at this point, this school year, where folks are starting to say, well, I put in what I wanted and it didn't look exactly like what I was hoping it would produce. And then they kind of walk away from it. And so this is where like having that conversation is important. And so we try to tell teachers, if you have a problem with what it produced, tell it, right? Go ahead and say, oh, this lesson plan is too complicated. It would take too long in my classroom. And that starts to help our educators kind of see what it's capable of and how that works. Now, you mentioned the band bands across all of the different schools in the country. And luckily, we're starting to see most school districts move away from bans. A lot of state guidance is coming out across the country that's telling folks that they kind of have to like embrace use of AI in some way or another. And at least we're starting to see a lot of educators themselves use AI. And so definitely the right place to start is seeing how can a teacher or anyone who's playing a role of an educator kind of start to figure out how they can use it for their own workflow. And that also helps you build that comfort level before you're having students use it, which is why we like to start with like, go figure out what's on your long to-do list and what can you start like having ChatGPT or any of these AI tools kind of do for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard you mention prompt engineering. So for those of you listening who might not be too familiar with that means, is basically when you refine whatever you're asking the AI to do for you, and you kind of provide context for it. So you ask it to do a to-do list, and it's the output that it gives you is a little bit messy. It's not really what you were asking for. You can actually give the AI some feedback and like, hey, chat, maybe this is not what I wanted. Or can you provide a little bit more on this specific bullet point or something like that? So how can teachers maybe start getting introduced to that world? So imagine most teachers, I would say, are not familiar at all with how to use generative AI. So how can they kind of approach it?
Yeah. So my recommendation is there's basically two groups of things that teachers can use these days. There's these generalized tools that are in a chat-based format, and so the ChatGPT, the Google Gemini, and those, or Bing Chat, and those, it's probably the easiest to go in and put in whatever your to-do list item is, right? So you would go ahead and create your account on one of those websites. There'll be a chat window that will look just like your WhatsApp or your Facebook Messenger, but you're talking to AI instead of human, and you would talk to it the way you might talk to another human and say, hey, I need to write a lesson plan for tomorrow on the Civil War for a group of 30 students in 9th grade. And see, I'm like starting to provide some context there. And so that's like the prompt engineering that I think teachers need to start thinking about is like, what's the largest amount of detail, like the most amount of detail I can provide to these AI bots to kind of produce what it needs to produce. Then there's the second set of tools, including the ones that we've put out called like the pedagogue.ai. But there's lots of tools out there like that kind of helps teachers scaffold this process, and they're more form-based. And so this is kind of traditionally how we're used to interacting with a website is like you kind of fill in a bunch of fields, click submit, and you see an output. And while we think that that's going to kind of like, we're going to move away from that as we see more and more conversational AI take over how we interact with the internet. For the time being, if you're just trying to figure out how to like see if AI is useful, it's a great like a stepping stone to doing that. And so if you go on our website, for example, you'll see a lesson plan builder, and we'll ask you questions. We'll say, what's the topic? What kind of learning teaching styles do you have? Are you using based learning, active learning? How many minutes is your class? And then kind of click submit, and it produces it for you. And that's kind of the second. That's where we hope that like folks who kind of are a little scared about this like open, I can put anything in this chat box, and kind of like go in, fill a format, and start to see exactly what AI can at least produce before they think about how they might initiate that production.
Yeah, and the other day I actually read your book. Congratulations on publishing.
Thank you.
And I saw that you provided a lot of examples of how teachers can actually integrate the AI into the classroom. Can you kind of discuss about how that integration would work? And then we can talk a little bit more about why these bans wouldn't be productive.
Yeah, awesome, good. So using it in the classroom is a whole different beast. And we're starting to think about exactly what the ethical ways to do this are, what the safe ways to do this are. And we're still seeing very few schools actually start to think about how they might have students use AI technology themselves. But I think thinking about how you might use it in a live classroom setting is probably the next step. So like first step is teachers figure out how to use it on their own time. Second step is, can we all use it together in a classroom setting before we think about how students might use it on their own? Because I think that's scary for parents, that's scary for teachers. I think everybody's kind of cautious about like wholesale telling everybody to just use the AI tools on their own. But in the classroom setting, one of our favorite examples is using tools like Socrat or Conmigo, both of which offer the option for teachers to kind of tailor exactly what the student is interacting with the chatbot on. And so they can do things like tell the student to have a debate with Socrat about climate change. And so then Socrat will only do that. It won't talk to them about anything else. It'll kind of have a respectful debate back and forth. And the teacher can see a live transcript of every single interaction. And those are the kind of things where we think are going to be important for ed tech tools, right? We're going to want ways to confine the limits of what exactly the students can talk about. We're going to want lots of monitoring features to make sure teachers know what's actually taking place. But the other option, and I think this is one that we are also seeing a lot of folks embrace, is putting it up on the screen. Put it up on a smartboard or your projector. Open up a ChatGPT screen and then interact with it as a class. And this is a great example of like being able to control the environment. You're not having students directly interact with it, but you're still exposing them to it so they kind of know what's out there and what's going on, and how they might start thinking about how they might use it in the long term.
Yeah, and I also wanted to touch on the ban a little bit more. So there's a lot of schools, especially I want to say that a lot of high schools here in Puerto Rico are moving towards like just outright banning it.
Yeah.
And I personally don't think that's really productive, because these students are still graduating into a world that's becoming very dependent on AI. So it's very important to teach students how to use these tools and why it's important to produce original work still in this evolving world. So can you talk a little bit about that? So why are not that productive, and also why it's important for people to know how to use these tools?
Yeah. I mean, we could probably talk the entire time about why these bans are a terrible policy decision. But I guess I'll stick to like some of the obvious and key points here to make, which are, I think you already like nailed it, right? Like I think the world that our students are going to inherit and they're going to like go out and about in is going to be very, very AI heavy. And so that will be like everything from their careers to their personalized. They're going to have to interact with AI tools. We're already seeing most industries try to figure out how to think about using AI in their industries, everything from the law space to medicine to journalism. And we'll continue to see more and more careers start to embrace and figure out what best ways there are to use AI. If we have some schools that are banning it and some schools that are not, we're going to be doing a massive disservice to the schools that are, like students who are in schools that are banning it. They'll be graduating with zero knowledge of how to use these tools. They might even be going to college and being with peers who have been trained on how to use AI effectively for their own learning. And we're going to start to see a gap between those students and further our achievement gaps that we already have across the country and the world. All of the equity gaps that we already have are just going to get worse if we don't kind of do a little bit of catching up and making sure that we're helping all of our students figure out how best to use these tools in their personal lives, in their careers, and in their academic life. The other thing is students are accessing these tools anyways. So banning it is not really doing it, right? This is the other, the big thing I hope that folks start to realize is my favorite example is January or February, right after ChatGPT came out, 2 months after, New York City School District decides to announce a huge ban on ChatGPT in the school computers. And I've talked about this a little bit about this in the book, but and this was just like, it was the most ridiculous thing to do, right? Because now you have like a bunch of students all across a massive city who might probably hadn't heard about ChatGPT yet, suddenly know that like their school banned it. And so now there's this like the fruit of the poisonous tree mentality to it, and everybody's like, oh, let me figure out how to access it. And now again, we start to see again, right? Students who had their own personal devices at home, students who had access to internet that wasn't school internet, were already going to like start playing around with it, use it to do the things that the school was worried they were doing. And then we have students who only had a school device or only had broadband access at school who were still not using those technologies. And so the ban is definitely like in every way going to make all our traditional problems in education worse. And we're going to have a bunch of students who are only using it in bad ways and don't know how to use it in productive ways. So I'm glad that we're starting to see some shifts away from the ban. I think schools are starting to realize that it's not going anywhere, that they kind of have to start having those conversations with their students and their teachers. But hopefully we see more of that, because I think it's happening at a way slower pace than you and I both want it to happen.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was a representative who was talking about that AI ban. It was kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, I think is the word they use. There's a lot of
New York City. Yeah, sorry. Just before I kind of like spoke ill of them for a second, but they did within like 2-3 months like turn around and like decided that ban was not a good idea. They put out that's important to mention. So they did realize that it was a knee-jerk reaction and not a sustainable strategy. But I mean, it's a large school district, and they were kind of confused and scared because they probably started hearing about cases of students using it for cheating. I think ban was probably the easiest like 2-month stopgap measure. But they did undo the ban within like 2 to 3 months, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect segue into the topic of plagiarism, because I think this is probably the biggest concern that a lot of educators have. But also, I work with students, and a lot of them have expressed to me that they don't even feel motivated to produce original work, because they feel like, why am I studying so hard? I'm going to graduate and an AI is going to replace my job. So why should I even do this? So what are some kind of ways that we can mitigate that sentiment?
This is going to be a really difficult task for educators. And this is one of the ones where like, I wish I had an easy answer when someone asking me these questions, these kinds of questions. But I think one of the things that we're going to have to start talking to our students about is how important the process of learning is over the outcome. And so this is where, like, when we think about teacher workflow, when we think about the legal space, when we think about like regular industry careers, there's an incentive to do things as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, because the goal is efficiency, right? Like if you're a lawyer and you can bill more hours because you're getting a lot of like busy work done really quickly, well, I guess it doesn't help you bill more hours, but at least you can bill more higher like dollar amount hours because you're doing higher level work because AI is doing the small level work or the simpler work. That's like there's an incentive to do that, right? So like if you can get something done faster, if you can code faster, that's great for a company. For students, that's not the best thing. Efficiency is not the goal for a student. The goal is actually exposure to the process. And so I think this is where like having those conversations about why we're teaching everything we're teaching in the first place is even more important than it's ever been. The problem is we've already have a massive like student engagement problem in the country where students are already kind of tuned out and like embracing like, kind of like over engaged on TikTok and social media. And then they come to school and it feels a little boring and not as engaging. Combine that with like some of the learning loss, a lot of the social emotional development stunted during the pandemic. And this is a recipe for disaster. And so there's no easy solution. I think a lot of this is going to involve like real like early conversations with our students about what the value of learning is, how we build on that learning is in our school systems. And it's not an impossible task. We've done this before, right? Like when the calculator is the go-to example for this, but when the calculator came out, everybody was like, oh, like what are we going to do? Like kids aren't going to want to learn basic arithmetic anymore. But we found ways to scaffold the introduction of a calculator. We don't like kindergartners don't use the calculator to do their like basic times table, but you're not seeing like a calculus student in like 12th grade using a calculator to do basic or like try to do arithmetic without a calculator, right? So we're starting to see that there are ways to kind of slowly introduce students to technology, help them understand that they kind of need those initial skills in order to do the higher level work. And so like if they want to write like this massive book, they might need to be able to write the simple paragraph that AI can do, but unless they write that first paragraph, they'll never be able to write the larger book. And I think that's the conversation that we kind of need to have with them. Not an easy one though. So I'm not, there's lots of somebody, but I think that's the only way is to kind of help them see the value of what we teach.
Yeah, and I think this is more so for both educators and students, and it's just the importance of human validation. I mean, AIs can be wrong. And I don't think a lot of people realize that even the training data that is used for AI can be very skewed and biased. Right. So I think this is a good segue to this topic. And how do we kind of teach students on how to detect these things, and even educators, because a lot of the times they just use the AI and they trust whatever output it gave them, even for like exam generations, or like, let's say it's a PowerPoint presentation and they just take it at face value. So it's not like Google, for example, where you can ask a question and you have a bunch of results, a bunch of pages. AI just gives you one result in the case of ChatGPT. So what are some ways that maybe we can make people more aware of this?
Yeah, and this is where I think like we're starting to see like a compounding effect on problems we've already had. And so we've already had a problem with like misinformation in the last like the last 5 years, 10 years. So I don't remember 5 years. And so we're kind of seeing more and more like of those kind of same skill sets that we need to build in our students, of like fact checking, making sure they verify their sources. But this is also a great conversation to have with our students and our teachers about why like learning things is still important. You still need some context to be able to like realize that something might be wrong. And you can't do that unless you have some background. And so, like, you know, if you're a doctor and you're like, look, if you're trying to figure out what medication to prescribe, if you don't know to ask it like for interactions with other medications, it's not going to give you a full answer. And so this is where like the doctor still has to know that like medications interact with other medications in order to ask the right questions, in order to fact check what the like output is being produced. And we're going to make sure like to kind of help our students see that, right? Like even if AI can answer all your questions in a second, there's value to knowing things because you can ask the right questions and also kind of gut check yourself on what that's actually being produced. The other thing is, at the same time, like the accuracy rate of AI algorithms is like, especially the more like the advanced algorithms, like the GPT-4, the Gemini Pro, like Claude Opulus or whatever they call Opulus, I think, Opus.
I think so.
But you know, those algorithms like are starting to see accuracy rates that are much higher than humans, and so we often, you know, like we're like the accuracy rate of a given educator or like me or you is much lower than any of these algorithms, and so there is a level of like, okay, like we can start trusting the ones that have established some sort of like accuracy rate that's higher. And even like when you're doing a Google search, maybe even all first 10 results might give you some different answer. And you have to do some thinking on your own about, okay, like which one is exactly the right one, and kind of do some of that critical thinking. And so there's some of these problems are just like, they're a new shape. And some of these things, I think, hopefully we can start to trust these algorithms the more powerful they get.
Yeah, I agree. And just to touch on another point that has to do with that, I think that this kind of, at least for me, it's exciting because when I see this, I think now higher education and expertise is going to be more important than ever, because we're going to need experts on the field to actually check these outputs and make sure that the information that's being delivered and is out there to the public is actually accurate. So if anything, this should be kind of motivating in a way that how can we use AI tools to actually create jobs. So of course it is scary. Like even I myself who's studying data science, I'm like, oh gosh, my job is going to be replaced in a few years. But at the same time, I see every time there's a new development, I see that there's something new that does need human intervention. So I think that's very important. So
yeah, okay. I think this is where like we kind of need to embrace the fact that we don't know what the future looks like at all. And so like anybody who's telling us, oh, these careers are going to be gone and these careers are going to be present doesn't really know anything. But I think this is where like emphasizing to our students that one of the things that they'll need to be good at is kind of learning on the fly, adapting, and those kinds of things will be way more important in the long run because like these things are kind of going to take shape really quickly. The world has changed dramatically in the last year and a half. I have no idea what the world's going to look like by the time like average like freshman in high school graduates college. And so I think like the reality is though that there will be some jobs, there'll be something for humans to do, and we have to make sure that our students have the skills to kind of adapt quickly to whatever new jobs are being created, but also kind of like have the resilience to make peace with that.
Yeah, exactly. And with that being said, I kind of want to move on to maybe more of the ethical considerations. So AI is moving forward. No matter what we do, no matter how many bans we put in place. So what are some of the main ethical considerations in academia specifically? We already talked a little bit about plagiarism and transparency, but what are some other major concerns?
So this is like, there's such a wide range of, and there's different like points in which we get to think about the ethical considerations. And so there's everything from thinking about the environmental costs of building these AI algorithms, and what that does, like the energy consumption that's involved and what the ethics of that consumption mean for a world that's rapidly facing a crisis of climate change. There's the ethics of like human reinforcement learning and how much the workers who are doing the reinforcement learning are being paid and what their labor is being valued at. There's the ethics of what the algorithms are being trained on and the fact that a lot of it's on copyrighted material that's stolen. And so, there's lawsuits out there that are trying to have these debates and kind of win these cases against the major algorithms, but those are major ethical issues about who owns work output in a world where AI companies are just taking all of it and using it without the traditional like systems of permission and payment and that we currently already and compensation we already have in our society. Then there's also concerns about like using like how folks are misusing AI algorithms, right? And so we want to think about using it for misinformation and manipulation. And this is the first election cycle that we've had in the U.S. since like ChatGPT and generative AI became popular, and I'm sure we're going to see lots of cases of like social media posts and echo chambers that get even worse because now AI is like producing exactly tailored content to like manipulate your political viewpoint or cater to it, in fact. And those kinds of problems we'll see where like not all use of AI is just like in the educational setting of cheating or productive. There'll be larger like worldwide implications of this as well. There's also like we're going to see cyberbullying, and that's a concern that we're already starting to see pop up across the country, where students are using image generators to create images of their peers that are fake, and that can, that level of like distrust in images, but also what that can do to a student's emotional development. That's a concern that we'll have to think about, and we want to make sure that our students are ethical consumers of this technology, right? So if we're teaching them how to make images using it, we also want to teach them when it's problematic to use it in a wrong way. And so, we can keep there's so many ethical considerations. Unfortunately, really, I wish it was a much easier problem where we can kind of just like say there's not that many. And then you already mentioned bias earlier, right? So we also want to be mindful of the fact that a lot of these algorithms, because they're trained on our human data, and we notoriously are very, very flawed and biased and have lots of stereotypes, those are kind of all get replicated by these algorithms. And so, I think an example that I often use is like DALL-E 2, which is the image algorithm that was like ChatGPT's version before this one, or OpenAI's version before this one. If you asked it to produce an image of a CEO, like all the images were of white men. And that's because like it was trained on a bunch of images where CEO was associated with white men. And so like now they've tried to like build in safeguards for it. And there's like debates about the ethics of those as well. But all those biases are going to get replicated. If you ask, for example, ChatGPT still, if you ask it to explain like something to your mom versus your dad, you'll see a very different metaphors used and different examples used. And that's all perpetuating these ideas of what gender means and what kind of biases we all have as a society. And so, and the other big part of the bias is that it's like trained on English language Western content. And so like there are algorithms that are popping up that are trained in other languages. There are a lot of vernacular language algorithms that are popping up. But the algorithms that we're using most popularly in the US are all ones that have been trained in a very Western context. And so when we're thinking about ESL students, when we're thinking about students from other countries who are in our classrooms, in the context that the AI tools that are going to cater to their needs those systems don't currently have that.
Yeah. No, and with those ethical considerations in mind, I think now more than ever, it's important to teach students to develop critical thinking skills and also ethics, as you very well mentioned. So it's really important to help students kind of discern like, oh, does this have bias? Is this perpetuating existing systems that maybe we shouldn't want to promote? So yeah. And another ethical concern that I did want to talk about is about equitable access and how that affects the achievement gap. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Another one where there's no easy answer. We actually saw a lot of this already like pop up during the pandemic, where students who didn't have broadband access, where schools didn't have one-to-one access, or didn't have the same access to like the schools that were taking place like schooling that was taking place online. And we tried to solve some of those problems during the pandemic, but I think folks were using like some stopgap measures because they were like, oh, the pandemic's going to eventually end. Like nobody knew when it was going to end, but like kind of all knew that it hoped it would end at some point. And we hope that like by the end of it, we can like get rid of whatever stopgap measures we had. And so maybe like they set up internet centers in cities where students can go and like access schooling. They like set up some short-term one-to-one device programs. But all those things we're going to have to kind of make long-term solutions for. And so making sure that all of our students both have access to the right level of technology, both the broadband and the actual device will be a preliminary step in making sure they get access to even these AI tools. And then the actual literacy, AI literacy and tech literacy is going to be a major problem. And so, and this is at both levels, right? So we're thinking about educators and students for this, because if educators don't have the tech literacy to use it most effectively, then they're not going to be able to like use the technology in ways that other schools are using it to better serve their students. But also students are going to come to like this technology with all different levels of their own technological proficiency. And so when you have students who don't have the capability to type as fast as the different student, or can't tell you exactly what like an algorithm is, their usage of technology will be dramatically different than a student who is taking an AP computer science class in a different place, right? So we want to start thinking about like basic access to the technology and what kind of achievement gap that might create. And then we also want to be mindful where like rapidly integrating the technology might also lead us to leave some students out. And this is a concern that I think that I'm not seeing enough of and I'm a little worried about. But where everybody's getting really excited that like, oh, we can start like pushing our students to do higher order thinking skills, and we can have them do like really advanced critical thinking, and we can have them write even better things and use this to like edit their writing. But we have lots of students across the country who still don't have basic like numeracy or literacy skills. And if we start like pushing our students too fast, they might start using this as a crutch. And that's another worry, right? So if students are starting to like come to class with a draft essay that's produced by ChatGPT versus their own, and then have AI work on it, you're going to get dramatically different versions of what the students' learning is from that. And that's another worry that I think we need to be mindful of. Is like, let's not get too excited either, and make sure that we're still like trying to fix the achievement gap we've already had before we try to like push the high end of it as well.
Yeah, and this is just me thinking as someone who's really excited about the topic of AI, to be honest. I think that AI can be used, even in those cases, to kind of personalize and individualize student learning, no matter what their situation might be. But even then, with the technology we have right now, not everyone has equal access. And I think Puerto Rico is a great example of that. A lot of students here don't even have Wi-Fi at home. And that's a topic we did talk about in a previous podcast. And a lot of students even stopped going to school after the pandemic. And I see a lot of students who 11 years old, 12 years old, that don't even know how to type on a computer. So these are things where now we need to start individualizing education even further. And I think that's where AI would come in, and teachers can kind of use that, because a lot of the times when you're an educator, you do have limits. You want to help every student, but it's kind of impossible. You're only one person. But now with AI, you can kind of use it to individualize lesson plans, for example. And you did elaborate that a little bit on your book. I remember that. So can you talk about maybe the examples there?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one where I think like this is where I think I take like a middle ground stance on like what exactly AI might mean, or what the risks and rewards of AI will be for education. Where I think that if we make the right decisions and take steps like the ones you're suggesting, rather than the ones I'm worried about, we'll see good results. And so there are really like positive implications of using AI in ways to actually solve the achievement gap rather than making it worse. We need to like make sure that we actually use it that way. And I think that, so like personalized learning paths is one example that I hope that we start to use. And this can help with both our accessibility concerns, our like engagement concerns, and also just making sure that like the students who need more reinforcement get more reinforcement. And so an example might be like if we're teaching about the Supreme Court and we're trying to like get students engaged on it, maybe when students are like learning the content, they see different content based on what their personal interests are. And so a student who's interested in environmental justice might see something about environmental policy in Supreme Court cases. A student interested in gender justice might see gender-related cases. And they're still learning the fundamentals of how the Supreme Court works, which is what the curricular goals are, but they're learning in ways that feels most relevant to them, most engaging to them. You might also see that like the student who's kind of like tripping up on exactly what the steps are for like how a case reaches the Supreme Court might see 20 questions about that rather than 5 questions about it, because the system produces more questions in order to make sure that they're getting the reinforcement they need, rather than the student who maybe is kind of has already got it down and can move on to the next thing. And so hopefully now, instead of students who are like limited by exactly what level of formative feedback their teacher can provide, what kind of assessments their teachers can create, because humans are limited in terms of how many different questions we can produce and how many different questions we can know which kid needs at a given time, we can hopefully better serve those students that way. And then hopefully we can also like produce it using different media. And like for someone who has hearing impairment, maybe there's a text-to-speech system built into it so that they're actually getting to listen to the same content. And there might actually be ways that like there's animations that built in for somebody who is a visual learner and kind of likes to learn things through some sort of like animated context. And so there, facility concerns, like engagement concerns, but also just like getting like exactly what students need at an exact moment. Hopefully, if we use the tools that way and the tools are built that way, we can actually kind of like start solving some of the problems that I think we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think nowadays attention span is a big problem with a lot of students, and we can even use, like I'm a tutor myself. A lot of students kind of lose that attention really quickly, especially the younger ones. So I, for example, have been using AI to help me generate some worksheets. So I had some students that were really into some TV shows and cartoons that I have never watched in my life. They were more than 200 episodes long. I don't have that kind of time, but the AI did know about it. So I was like, can you generate some math exercises that kind of this? And my students loved it and they were engaged. And those are just just a small example, but that's a way that all educators can kind of use it and maybe get their students to actually feel more entertained during class, especially in this age where information is just constant. Especially, I mean, I'm a Gen Zer myself, so I understand that we're just constantly on social media. Information is being fed to us so quickly. It's kind of easy to lose that attention. So we can kind of use AI to mitigate that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's a perfect example of using it to like kind of like meet our students where they are, but still hit the exact curricular goals. Like you're still making math problems. It's not like you're right. Like it's not you're not deviating completely from what they need to learn. In fact, you're helping them learn exactly what they need to learn, but in a way that speaks to like their interest. I think that's really like hopefully we see more use of that at a larger scale. But yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, and also in the book, I remember this example about like I think it was the founding fathers and kind of putting things as if it were in their perspective and also with image generation. And I think it did make it feel more real to the students because a lot, I also saw on the website with Martin Luther King that you can kind of chat with Martin Luther King. And I thought that was so cool. And I think that's a great way to get students engaged.
Yeah, we love, like I personally love using that tool on Socrat where like it can role play as a historical figure and kind of have a conversation with the student about a topic. And this is where like there's like there are learning skills that are really important. They're learning how to ask the right questions. They're learning how to like the inquiry-based learning goals that we have in education to kind of get them to learn through thinking about what exactly their own knowledge gaps are, what they might ask if this person was actually alive or in front of them. But there's a lot of potential here. And so I think like the VR, AR example, I think will be really cool where hopefully we start to see like students get to like go back in time or do virtual field trips and kind of get to some context for exactly what like they're learning about. But they might also get to start seeing some real world implications, right? So like it's one thing to like read about the Supreme Court, but it's another thing to like maybe in our VR world, like fight a Supreme Court case and like kind of like really motivate you in a very different way than you like writing an essay about the Supreme Court does. And so, the technology is not exactly like super popular or super accessible yet, but I don't think it's as far as I think a lot of folks think it is. And hopefully we start to see some of that use because I think it's exciting for all of us.
For me, that's super exciting. And not gonna lie, I do log into ChatGPT a lot and I just kind of chat with it for a while and I like kind of to experiment with it a lot. But you did touch on a little bit about like that human aspect of it. And a lot of students, especially during the pandemic, they kind of lost that one-to-one conversation. So we can even use these AI tools to kind of foster that culture where a lot of people see it as like, aren't we losing that? But in reality, it can be used as a way to enhance that human aspect in education too.
Yeah, the goal is to hopefully use it as a stepping stone. I have concerns about like if we like over rely on the AI technology, I think we are going to lose some of the like there's uniquely human aspects of this. Like even like you and I talking today versus like you and I chatting with ChatGPT would be dramatically different. We're reacting to each other's facial expressions, our body language, the tones of our voice are fluctuating, and we know a little bit about each other's backgrounds, right? And all of that kind of helps like us have a conversation that feels more human and react to each other in a way that hopefully makes a nice conversation for folks to listen to, which is those are skill sets that students can only gain by interacting with other humans. And so hopefully while there's a little bit of like scaffolding and they can practice some of these skills, especially like respectful argumentation skills, like that's a debate skills. AI is a great opportunity to practice some of those things, negotiation, basic communication, persuasion skills. But then hopefully they get a chance to apply all of that in the real world, because that's the ultimate goal, right? The goal is to get them to be able to be better humans who interact with other humans.
Yeah. And I know you have a background in philosophy. I'm kind of a philosophy nerd myself, so I did want to talk on this topic a little bit. So there's this term about techno-humanism. So for those of you watching who might not know what that is, it's basically a philosophical and ethical perspective where we integrate the human aspect and the technological aspect to kind of enhance the human experience. So even with things like smartphones, people weren't born with a smartphone in their hand, but Apple, mostly Apple, but they kind of created a need for people to have a smartphone. And it's a tool that we use every day. To not have a smartphone kind of feels like you're being dragged back a little bit. So can you talk about your perspective on that a little bit, about how we can enhance the human experience with the use of technology and AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think the smartphone is the best example because I think the AI tools will kind of be augmenting that experience already. And so I think one of the there's a trickle effect of all of these things. Like AI wouldn't be as powerful in terms of how which we can access it if like all these other earlier improvements in technology hadn't happened. Like if the smartphone hadn't been invented, our access to AI on the go would be dramatically different than it is now. We can all download a ChatGPT app because like Steve Jobs invented the iPhone. But if we didn't have a smartphone and already be so heavily reliant and used to it, our use of those AI technologies would be substantially less. I'm also a little bit of like a skeptic about how over like integrating technology into our lives. And so I'm hoping that like we can kind of take a cautious tone in terms of exactly what the value of being a human is, what the value of interacting with other humans are. And so I think while there's like amazing benefits that we've all seen to both our functioning in the world, our own like like joy in the world, we've also seen some loss of it. Right. And so I think there has been a massive, like, there's a crisis of loneliness in the country. And I don't think that our like social media consumption or like chatting with chatbots is solving any of that. And so while I think we will continue to see ways in which it makes us better and more efficient, especially in our careers, I hope we can also remember to disconnect at times and kind of just like remember to connect with real humans in like a non-technical setting. Because there's something uniquely valuable about that I don't think can be replicated. And so while I'm talking about VR and AR and I'm talking about all those things, there's like the philosophy nerd in me still thinks there's an epistemic difference between the kind of knowledge we're gaining from real experiences versus these virtual experiences, and in a way that I don't think is replicable completely. And so that's my like little the philosophy nerd coming out a little bit in that like I think there's still lots of value in the real world. And I hope that we can teach our students how to embrace it and kind of make the most of it. And there's also there's easy ways to have some of these conversations, right? So, like my example right now is about a poem written by ChatGPT versus by a Holocaust survivor. Like the emotive response that we have is substantially different, even if the content is similar, the language is similar. Like you and I will feel very differently reading that poem written by the Holocaust survivor than by ChatGPT, even if all the language is the same, even though like poetic structure is the same, because there is something uniquely human about being able to relate to it. And I hope our students can see the value of that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to educate students about how to use AI, and why, I think I said it before, like why ethics is going to become even more important, why philosophy is going to be more important, critical thinking is going to be more important. Because while yes, we do have these tools readily available to us, we can't over rely on them and replace the human experience and replace human to human relationships. Because at the end of the day, they're just a tool to enhance the experience, not replace it. So yeah. So all right, then based on that, how do you kind of envision the future of AI in education, or just AI in general, based on what we were saying?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good time to just remind everybody that we get to shape what the future looks like, right? So I think a lot of conversations, especially about AI, because it's this like, in some people's minds, is this magical, mysterious thing. There's a lot of like complacency and passiveness about like, oh, like AI is going to do this to the world, or AI is going to do this to the world, or like we're building those technologies now, right? So this like there are developers out there building that technology, there are data scientists backing that technology up, and we're the ones who are shaping exactly how we use it, how we integrate it, what policies are made about it. And this is a good time to think about what exactly we value about like our lives, about our societies, and what things we want AI to help us with, how we want to integrate it, in which ways we decide that it's not important for us, or we think it's detrimental to us to think about the integration of AI. And that's true for society at large. That's true for education in particular. And so like there's really easy examples of seeing that. I think humans will end up. I like there's a bit of an optimist in me that thinks that we're going to end up on the right side of this. And I know there's lots of people that who are much more pessimistic, and so maybe I should listen to them. But I think that like we've already seen some of this in history, right? So another example that like I like to talk about is the fact that like cars can go really fast, right? We have cars that can, or even jets that can go even faster. But people will still go to a stadium and watch humans race each other. Even though like cars can technically go faster than any human can ever go, because there's something uniquely valuable about seeing a human who can run that past. And I hope that like those kinds of things that we see that value in other humans, I think that's going to continue to like proliferate. I think we're going to continue to see that. I think we're going to realize, okay, like it's really cool when AI does it, but it's still really cool when a human does it, right? And I think that will continue. And I hope that that's the future where like we can use AI in ways that as a tool that's productive, that helps us be better. By the end of the day, that we're still doing all the things that make us like happy and fulfilled in our lives.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why a lot of people are a little bit reluctant about AI. They see it and they kind of say, oh my God, this is going to replace all of us. It's going to replace the human experience. And I can see why, because the first time I used ChatGPT, I couldn't believe that wasn't a human on the other side typing really fast, because it just looks exactly like something a human would say. So based on that, I think a lot of people just need to realize that AI is, at the end of the day, designed as an assistant tool. The same way that things like Alexa, for example, they're there, but they're not there to replace you. Siri's not there to like replace a real human friend. But now with AI, it's a little bit more advanced than that. So that's why it's a little bit important to have these conversations in the classroom and talk to students about how they're feeling and what's their perspective on this. Because like I said before, a lot of my students are coming up to me and telling me, like, I don't even feel motivated to continue working on things because AI is going to replace us anyway. So why should I even put the effort in? So it's why it's so important to kind of drive, instead of being so pessimistic about it. I would call myself an optimist in this topic too, because I do think it's pretty cool. When I saw that ChatGPT was going to be publicly available, I got very excited personally, because I was like, I think it was a big deal that anyone who has internet access can essentially open ChatGPT and use it for themselves. It's not behind a paywall. Although we can kind of talk about why Wi-Fi access and having a computer at home is technically a paywall, but at the same time, it's very important to emphasize and remember that these things should be publicly available. And in schools, and maybe even the government itself, should kind of provide these things for everyone.
Yeah, I think there'll be lots of policy questions about access to the AI technologies. And we're seeing that the access, like the most powerful algorithms they're basically available to everybody, with all the caveats. Maybe like, like the very next algorithm might not be available, and we don't really know what's happening in like some like dark research lab somewhere. But for the most part, like the most powerful algorithms are equally available to everybody, and that is kind of a powerful thing to think about. But also we want to think about like what everybody needs in that context as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember I was talking to my mom about AI, and she was like, "Isn't it going to replace all of our jobs, and isn't like the government going to benefit from just automating everything, or big tech companies are going to benefit from automating everything?" And I was like, you know what? Yeah, maybe we will automate everything, but wouldn't the economy fall apart as a result? So these are things that we have to kind of think about logically, because a lot of the perspective on AI is based on science fiction. And while there are a lot of ethical concerns, I think people are kind of focusing on more of the sci-fi side of it, rather than the real concerns that we're already seeing. So that's why maybe even topics like universal basic income has become a lot more popular now as a result of AI, because even if our jobs get replaced, wouldn't this be an opening for the human experience to kind of change? Because we've been based on this more capitalistic system where everyone has a job, everyone has to do this. Maybe with the use of AI, we can kind of shift towards a future where we can kind of focus on learning and doing things that we're actually interested in, even if they're not lucrative, because AI can do all the dirty work. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we share a perspective on this, and so I think like when someone says like, "Oh, well, jobs are lost," I think the right answer is so what, right? Like I think we're on the same page that I mean, if we could ask those deeper questions about what we want out of a human society, and like not take for granted that like a 40-hour work week is like something that it must be something that is part of our lives, our students' lives, I think we can start to like really reimagine what the world looks like. I don't think anybody's ready for these conversations though, and that's the sad part, right? Like I think like I'm sure there are people on this call even who are like starting to like are thinking this is like really far off. And I think the reality is that these conversations probably need to be happening now so that we can start making those shifts in time for these things. Because you're right, like if we get caught off guard by everybody's job being replaced overnight, it'd be terrible. if we can think about what we might do as a society if AI could do a lot of our jobs, and kind of build our structures around it, maybe think about a UBI or some other structure for that, we might actually be able to like create a much better world for humans. But I wish more people would be talking about this.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people think that's like way, way, way off in the future, but I don't think people realize just how fast AI is kind of moving. So it's really important to have conversations. And I think that a lot of this, again, has to do with being able to talk about these things. Because when we think about the human experience, we are thinking about the modern human experience. Humans were not designed to be working a 40-hour work week behind a desk. Like humans weren't 5,000 years ago or less on a desk for 40 hours a week. That's not really what we were designed to do. We also were not designed to consume so much information at such a rapid pace. So things like an AI can kind of help us and not really replace us. It can actually just make being a human a better experience, in my opinion. Well, yes, there are a lot of ethical concerns, and it does fall a lot of it does fall on the shoulders of these tech giants and the governments as well, because there is pushback on either side. And I can see where a lot of those fears come from as a result.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think just thinking about like if AI can get rid of all the things that have made us more machine-like, what does it mean for us to be more human? Just like, I think that's a good way to start thinking about the future. And I think like the most important people to think about that are our educators, right? Like they're if we can ask those questions in terms of what we're teaching our students, how we're shaping them, how we're shaping their outlook on the world, and what kinds of skills we're fostering in them. I think we can hopefully move towards exactly the kind of world that you and I think is doable and feasible and real within a really short time frame.
Yeah, I agree. And just to go back a little bit, since we're almost out of time, just talk a little bit and sort of summarize it for the viewers. What are some things that we maybe should promote in the classroom? Like, what are the main topics now that we're essentially throwing students into a world that's become dependent on AI? What are some of the main topics that we should be promoting with students and going over with students?
Yeah, I think there's been things that we talked about all throughout the class today. And I think that's like the ability to think critically has always been important. I think that importance is even higher now as we think about the amount of information that they're consuming, the amount they have to think is higher. And so I think making sure that our students are prepared to like have real deep thinking moments in life and not kind of like consume passively is going to be really important. And then the second half is like making sure that our students are thinking about like what makes a human, right? So that includes everything from what makes another human. And so like hopefully we can move away from like a very dehumanized approach to both education and how they consume technology right now. And help them start thinking about what it means to communicate with somebody else, what it means to empathize with somebody else, and all those soft skills that like everybody's been calling the 21st century skills for the last like few decades. Those really are the 21st century skills. And so hopefully those are the ones we can focus on in our school systems to move away from the standardized testing and the memorizing, and like, let's figure out how we can all prepare for this exact career that we see for you, because that career is not going to exist.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. So now I guess I'll take it to the audience. I can't see the questions myself, so I'm going to have to ask Ms. Tiffany for some help with that. Has anyone asked any questions? Does anyone have any questions or comments, or maybe any topics that they want us to touch on a little bit?
Hi, so I don't think anyone we've had some comments and some good conversation in the chat, and I've had a few text messages, but I think, Sophia, your questions are like spot on. So we haven't had any questions yet, but yeah, I just really appreciate this conversation. I've been taking notes, and it's just such a rich conversation, chock full of information to kind of take back. And I'm just even thinking about how tutoring is going to evolve, right? How, we're at our core, we're a tutoring company, and we have other services and products, of course, but our goal is to help. And you guys touched on this, but, I'm interested in how even tutoring will change, either for the better or for the worse, the next 5 to 10 years, and how companies like Gillis Education can adapt. And I know Sophia and I have already talked about, like, this is a chance for companies like us to really engage in grabbing students and helping them not only with their math and reading and science but literally introducing them to the world of AI and even intro to coding. And so just like the internet has, as you all have touched on, has become the thing that we cannot live without, AI is going to be the same. And it's up to us to kind of make sure that there is digital literacy across the board with all students. And so we've been talking about, even for us, how can we start teaching our students that come through Gillis Education intro to coding? How can we introduce them to Chat GPT during our tutoring sessions to make sure that they know how to use it ethically? So just, maybe one final question for me is, how do you all see tutoring changing going forward?
So definitely, I've seen a lot of tools. I think Chegg recently came out with an AI tool where it kind of walks you through how to do mostly math exercises, and it kind of walks you step by step on how to do them. But even then, while it does give you like a step by step process, a lot of students need that like reinforcement, repetition, and just need someone there telling them like, hey, are you paying attention? Are you doing this? Because a lot of students need that human next to them, especially kids. So even with the advent of AI, I do think that, again, these are just going to be tools. It's going to facilitate, like even me as a tutor, sometimes having to do a math exercise really quickly on the side. I skip over some steps because I've done it 1,000 times, but a student has never seen this topic before. So something like the Chegg tool is really helpful to me. But the students still need that, like going step by step. Where did this number come from? Where did this number come from? Because sometimes students kind of pinpoint something and they're like, I don't know what that is. So that's just one small example of how I think that AI might change. But even then, there's still going to be that need for a human there.
Yeah, I have to agree that I think and I think you nailed it when you said that a child needs the tutor next to them who's going to say, oh, like pay attention. Because I think at the end of the day, like all of us kind of are much more accountable to another human. We're much more likely to do something because another human is holding us accountable than because we have this tool in front of us. And so while I think these tools can make tutors more effective because they help you produce those customized math problems, or maybe help you access more information quickly, and maybe even supplement the tutoring that you're providing, I think at the end of the day, students will need another human to kind of guide them through that entire process and create the accountability structures that are needed.
Well, thank you guys. I will use this opportunity to just kind of close us out. Again, Priten Shah, thank you, author of AI and the Future of Education. Sofia Rios, who is a tutor and educational consultant with Gillis Education, and data scientist. I appreciate both of you. This was such a rich conversation. And I encourage others to, kind of go back and rewatch this from the beginning. If you do have comments or questions, feel free to email us. We're on Instagram, we're on X, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. Talking about all this AI, we're all over the social media. Hopefully the algorithm, gets us to, reach more people. But, we're available for questions. And of course, as well, you can get Priten Shah's book on Amazon. We got it on Amazon. So feel free to, purchase his book, reach out to him with questions as well. But this was such a great conversation. I appreciate Sofia for leading it, and Priten for just taking time out of your day and both of you, your busy days and your busy lives to chat about this very, very important topic.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun, Sofia.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much for listening, and also Priten for being able to talk to me and leading this conversation. It's not that often that I get to talk with an expert like this, so thank you so much for joining us.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.